To those of you who may be stuck at home due to COVID and unable to adequately train their hamstrings, I've come up with a bit of an exercise that I've been using with my clients to adequately, train the hamstrings, and it's got both a regressed and a progressed option, so it's pretty much, it can be used by anyone, essentially. I'm going to get Christine to go through it with us now quickly. The things you'll need are a skateboard and a mat, just to pretty much make yourself comfortable. What I will say this though, when you do set up on the mat, make sure to scoot your bum as low on the mat as possible, because when you're rolling in and out with the skateboard, you want to make sure that the wheels don't touch the mat and then prevent you from actually flexing and bending the knee and bringing it as close to your bum as possible. So we're going to start off with the single leg variant, so the one-legged skateboard curl. You're going to line the skateboard up with your hip socket. So if you're moving your right leg, you want to line the skateboard up with your right hip socket and your right leg. With the left leg, the stationary leg, you're going to get up into the hip bridge position, and depending on how high you bring your pelvis will pretty much dictate how hard the exercise is going to be. If you're just starting out and you haven't trained your hamstrings for a while, maybe start with your pelvis a little bit lower to the ground. So in that way, not as much of your body weight is going to be behind the moving leg. So Christine, can you bring your hips up for me? And then from that position, I want you to extend your leg out and then curl it back in. Awesome. As you can see, she's trying to keep a relatively hip extended position. So that essentially means that her leg is going to be straight in line with the rest of her body, full hip extension. And then with the other leg, she's going to be straightening it out under the predisposed tension and then bring it back. She's also keeping her ankle at a nice 90-degree angle here. I prefer that. You can point your toe if you like, play around with it, but I find that to be the most comfortable. And as the goal is to place the most amount of pressure on the hamstring, I wouldn't worry too much about the nuances of whether or not to point the toe or not. But it's up to you ultimately. So that's pretty much the single leg hamstring curl, or skateboard curl for this matter. And if you want to make it harder, you can always add a band to the tire frame of the skateboard and link it that way. So then that way you've got another aspect of tension on the pulling angle. So now the two-legged or the bilateral skateboard curl. So with the single leg, you are lining the skateboard up with your hip socket and the moving leg. In this circumstance, we're going to line the skateboard up with the middle of our pelvis, so pretty much our groin. And depending on the difficulty yet again, will dictate, and Christine's ability, that will dictate how high she lifts her hips. So if you, as I said, if you're starting out and you haven't done any sort of hamstring curl variant in a while, I would recommend that you keep your hips relatively low for the first set, see how you go, and if you're able to do that, then obviously lift your hips, and then if that's easy enough, then you can add a band to it and make it even harder. So Christine, can you show us the hips closer to the ground option? In all of these options, your hips are still going to be off the ground. I don't want your bum touching the ground, otherwise you're not going to have enough adequate tension behind the hamstrings to actually get anywhere with it. So this is the regressed or the easier version. And then can you bring your hips up higher for the last one for me? So this is harder now. Makes sense. I mean, we're putting more body weight behind her legs. And this is a lot more similar, thanks, you can stop. That was a lot more similar to the laying hamstring curl variant, where whilst you're in a hip extended position, you have to curl the weight, very similar to a laying hamstring curl. And then the other variant, where she was flexing at the hip, her bum was still off the ground, but it was a lot lower, was much more similar to that of a seated hamstring curl. So as you can see, there are multiple variants here that we can use to adequately stimulate different areas of the hamstrings. Regardless though, a few little cues that I like to utilize. If you're starting off with this exercise, use your hands as stabilizers. Put them down by your side and allow them to support your frame whilst you lift your pelvis up in the air, e.g. And then also, I'll also suggest that try to keep your midsection and your core kind of engaged, at least loosely. You don't want to be folding and crippling in that area. You want it to kind of be stable, so then that way you can adequately put enough pressure behind your pelvis and onto the hamstrings. If you're too loosey-goosey through that area, it may throw you off and it may create a little bit of discomfort and issues, specifically for those who have any sort of lower back issues. So that's pretty much the skateboard curl. If you guys have any questions regarding it or you need any further advice, please let me know. Cheers.